Audio spento. Aspettiamo magari 2 o 3 minuti, anche perché adesso dopo ti ho messo sotto la scaletta, te l'ho stampata.
Noi andiamo, cioè...
Andiamo in diretta su Microsoft Teams.
Sì, ma noi andiamo su Teams, è un Teams, non è un StreamYard. Okay.
Sì, e dopo si interfaccia in automatico con... Ormai è una...
Ciao a tutti.
Casa.
Non ti sento, eccoti.
Ok, questo dalla voce dovrebbe essere Alberto, giusto?
Esatto, non mi vedi?
No, non ancora.
Ah, mannaggia.
Perché abbiamo messo il visore.
Ah, va bene.
Ecco, sei lì in basso.
Piccolo ma ci sono.
Ecco, grazie. Aspettiamo un attimino e poi iniziamo. Però su YouTube si vede solo... ok, perché lui non è in modalità panel. Ok. Okay, so we wait a couple of minutes and then we will start. Okay, so let's start the event of today. So welcome everybody for being here. So let me first start introducing myself, as I'll be the co-chair of this event together with Professor Phoebe Condori. And I am Marta Castellini. I am a researcher at the University of Padova at the DCO department, and I am also a researcher here at the University of Brescia and Fondazione Enrico Mattei. I want first to thank all of you for being here today and in presence and of course connected online. Today we will have the chance to learn more about a topic that comes along with many challenges for us as human beings, that is the complex relation between peace, resources and the environment. We will do that thanks to 3 really important speakers that are Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the director of the Center of Sustainable Development of the Columbia University and the president of UN SDSN. Professor Raul Caruso, which is here on site with me, which is professor in economic policy and the Department of Economic Policy of the University Cattolica of Milan, and Dr. Alberto Pallecchi, the program manager of the World Resource Institute of Europe in Amsterdam. Before I will open the panel, I would like to thank the supporting institution and the people involved in the organization of this event, together, of course, with our speakers of today. This event was conceived by Professor Sergio Vergalli of the University of Brescia and Fondazione Enrico Mattei, who was not able to attend today, but sends his regards to all of us. And of course myself, with the support of Ilenia Gaia Romani and Cristina El Kouri. also from the University of Brescia and Fondazione Enrico Mattei. This event is also part of a series of initiatives promoted by the municipality of Brescia within the Festival of Peace, or Festival della Pace in Italian, and it is organized within the national framework of the University of Peace. It is also a way in which our Department of Economics and Management of the University of Brescia celebrates the 10th year anniversary of the Italian Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. The event is also supported by the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, Fondazione Enrico Mattei, and ISEO Institute. So now that I've made all my duties, I think that we have connected here also the IAERE President, Professor Alessio D'Amato, for the institutional greetings and some words about the IAERE tour for the 10th year anniversary. I don't know if Alessio, if you're here, you can unmute yourself. Okay, yes, to share the screen. Alessio D'Amato, if possible, thank you. One second, we will deal it with the ICT. He said that has everything not.
Ah.
Okay, so Alessio, you are here anyway.
Okay.
Okay, now
Thanks.
we hear you.
I'm sorry, but now it appears that I can do most of the things with the exception of sharing the screen, but sharing the screen is not strictly needed. So I will go without the screen, but I am very grateful to Marta and to all the organizers and the University of Brescia for accepting to be part of this tour of initiatives all around Italy. Sorry, I see that I can share the screen, so hopefully, okay. Now I think that I hope that you can see my screen. Okay, so I was saying thanks a lot to the organizers and to all the supporters and to all the speakers of an event that I am sure will be an intriguing and thought-provoking event. And I'm particularly grateful because the University of Brescia, and Marta in particular, accepted to be part of this tour of the Italian Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, which is intended as a celebration of our 10th anniversary. For those of you who do not know our association, it is a young association, 10 years old, but it's already very active in environmental and resource economics. And the idea of this tour is to give you an idea of how wide in Italy, but also beyond Italy, the activities of scholars involved in the association are, and to let you know that our association exists. And so my invitation is, if you are interested in environmental and resource economics, I think that you will definitely find it interesting to follow our tour, which will end on the 5th of December with an online event organized by my university, Tor Vergata, and the University of Roma Tre, and more generally follow the activities of the association and become involved. I exploit this chance, and then I will stop to say also that at the end of November is the deadline for submitting a paper to next year conference that will take place in Naples on the 23rd and 24th of February 2023. So thanks a lot again for all the people that will take part to this intriguing event and a very hot event. And thanks a lot to the organizers for accepting to be part of our tour and follow our association. Thanks a lot, Marta. I leave the floor back to you.
Okay, thank you, Alessio, for your participation. And now I'm asking to allow Professor Phoebe Kunduri to talk, and she will send the regards of the European Association. So, 1 second.
Okay, thank you very much, Marta, for having us here. And this is to thank Sergio Vergalli and his team, together with the other organizers of this very important event, for helping everybody, helping the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economics further develop this very important science policy interface. The European Association of Environmental and Resource Economics is the biggest association in the world of environmental economists, scientists, and professionals. It includes members from 85 different countries and organizes every year a very big conference on almost all thematic areas that are related to environmental and natural resource economics. We are a very big community of 1,500 members that, in addition to our annual conference, that is our, let's say, emblematic activity every year, we also run various seminar series, including the one that you are following now, but also other seminar series that are regularly announced in our communication media. We have a policy outreach committee which is advising the European Commission and other policy institutions based on the work and analysis of task forces. We have a diversity committee helping different minority groups further engage and evolve in the area of environmental and natural resource economics. We participate and lead the World Council of Environmental Economies, including the European, the American, the Latin American associations of environmental economies, and organizing global thematic events on this. We are also currently in the process of launching a new book series, which is gonna be on elements books that are focusing on a very important cutting-edge technical reviews of the main important literatures in our field. And in general, I don't want to capitalize on your kindness. Just visit our website and see how the association can support you to further evolve us, and this is how you can use the platform of the association in order to increase the profile of your work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phoebe. Now we know that Professor Sachs is on his way. So don't know, since we are co-chair, if you want to introduce him, or I do it myself, but I think he doesn't need any presentation. So let me check if he is connected, or we will wait a second. Yeah, we are giving him the power to speak. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Good morning, because I think for you it's good morning, Professor Sachs. This is Marta speaking. Thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
And, for taking the time for being with us. So we have also connected here Phoebe Konduri. And yeah, we are here with Professor Caruso and Professor Alberto Pallecchi. So I think that you don't need an introduction because everyone knows who you are. So if it's fine for you, I will just ask you a couple of questions.
Perfect.
And then you can share your thoughts with us.
Perfect.
Thank you. So as I was thinking about how to discuss with you the topic of the today event, which is the relation between peace, resources, and the environment. Then I reminded myself that this event comes after two really important forums that are, of course, the COP27 in Egypt and the G20 in Bali. So we are in a world which is strongly worried by the Russia-Ukraine conflict. There is an energy crisis, and we are all aware that the climate is changing. So it's kind of a complex picture. So both the two forums were fundamental in addressing the three topics of today's event, that are the peace, the availability of resources, and the environmental implication of the human activity on Earth. In light of such a complex international situation, I would like to ask you, which is the perspective on a possible solution in solving such a challenging puzzle? So I apologize if maybe the question is kind of hard, but we would like to know your opinion on that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. That's the right question. I wish we knew the answer. Then we would all feel better. We live in a world that is profoundly unequal and deeply insecure, and we're trying to find a way to reduce the inequalities by raising the well-being of those who are the bottom half of the world, struggling for basic material decency and dignity and even survival, and to raise the security of the world in two senses. One, our physical security in the face of massive environmental risks, and second, our geopolitical security in the face of great power confrontations, which are extremely dangerous and ongoing right now. So my own view of this is that this can only be accomplished indeed through a global cooperation framework like the two big events that we just had in the past 2 weeks, the COP27 and the G20, and that it requires a different kind of geopolitics and a different kind of global organization. So let me briefly explain my take on this after having been at both of these meetings and participated in both of them. First, there is a worldwide sense of insecurity that is shared everywhere. And that's both because the insecurity is real and meaning that we actually have the chance to do something about it as well. There's no part of the world that says, we're doing great, what's everyone complaining about? And that means that there actually was a meaningful discussion in both these forums, COP27 and the G20. To my mind, if we're going to get serious on solutions, though, we need serious new approaches both to geopolitics and to the Sustainable Development Challenge, which is the challenge of economic progress for poorer countries in a context of environmental sustainability. On the geopolitics, I believe that we are in need of an explicit move to a new multipolar world from a U.S. presumption of a divided world in which the U.S. leads a free world, so-called, against challengers. The geopolitical vision of the United States is that we have the West, which has wonderful values, and we need to protect them. The U.S. leads the West, and it faces two big adversaries, Russia and China. I view this model of the world as completely wrong, actually. And I resent the U.S. arrogance of it, and I resent the European acquiescence to the U.S. arrogance of it. We don't have a world divided in that way. We have a world that is struggling to find solutions to common problems. And we should not start by dividing the world between the good guys and the bad guys, but rather start by saying that our big challenge is our common fate of a world that is profoundly unstable, unequal, and environmentally threatened. And the difference of this, in my view, is that the United States would not be creating conflict with Russia and China. And I think if we had a different attitude, Russia would not have gone to war in Ukraine also, because I view this war in Ukraine as a proxy war between big powers, not as some kind of inevitable war of Russia on Ukraine per se. I think the biggest single mistake was the presumption of expanding NATO to Ukraine, which was a stupid idea of a really stupid American president, George Bush, but carried on by all of the subsequent presidents, including our current president. And if we wanted to end the war, the first thing we would do was say, let's stop NATO enlargement and negotiate a new security framework for Ukraine, for Russia, and for Europe. But, you know, our leaders don't say that. And even your new prime minister, you know, who's considered to be a right-wing critic of the system, her first words were, no, we'll never be the weak link of NATO. And so Italy gave up its voice the first moment of the new government. And when Draghi tried to have a voice before that, he was also shut down by the US. You know, we don't want to hear Italy. We don't want to hear Macron. We will lead. Thank you very much. And so I think that a lot of our geopolitical problems actually emanate from the United States, I'm sorry to tell you. But they emanate from this idea that the world should be divided by alliances, and that the fundamental issue in our world is division, not common fate. So I start with the geopolitics, and I start with my country because it is very powerful, often very stupid, and very provocative. And I would rather have a different approach entirely, which starts by the United States saying to Putin, to President Xi, to others, look, we've got to solve a lot of problems. We need to sit down and discuss and negotiate and find ways to end the war in Ukraine, to reduce the tensions in East Asia, to make common efforts on climate and poverty and other issues. And my belief is there would be a resonance to that. That this would be actually the way to move forward. Instead, we have something completely different right now. We have the US saying that we're in some existential battle with Russia and China. We have Europe that has turned its whole diplomacy as being a sidekick of the United States. There are no diplomats in Brussels anymore. They're only warmongers, I'm afraid. We've got to expand the war. We've got to send more arms. We've got to do all of this. Ukraine's winning, they say. Yeah, winning, but it can't keep the lights on or the heat on for the winter. What kind of winning is that? It's a complete disaster, and we should tell the truth. Nobody's winning this war. All that's happening is the Ukraine is being destroyed in this by the failure to have proper negotiations. Then we're told, don't negotiate, that's appeasement. But we didn't even try to negotiate. There hasn't been one day of negotiation between the US and Russia. If we had tried and negotiations had failed, that would be another matter. But we don't even try. And that's a huge mistake. With China, it's maybe a little bit better because Biden met with President Xi at the G20 and then followed up by sending Secretary of State Blinken to China, and both sides said that they wanted to raise the dialogue. And interestingly, also the defense secretaries have met, and our defense secretary, Austin, said it's very important for great powers to meet, and yet he doesn't meet with his Russian counterpart. He only meets with the Chinese counterpart. But my point is that our whole setup is really wrong right now. And this was apparent at the G20, of course. The Indonesians had tried to organize a meeting between Biden and Putin. And Biden said, no, I'm not going to meet with Putin. Then Putin said, I'm not coming to the G20. The opportunity was lost. And this is viewed somehow as grown-up behavior rather than as childish behavior, which I think it is, actually. So that's the first point. The second point is that there's another divide, obviously, in the world, and that's the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And we don't have a serious plan or proposal on the table to enable the have-nots to make their way forward. And that was the crucial issue from the economic side, both at the COP27 and at the G20 meeting. Again, let me start with the United States. The U.S. entire political system is organized to protect rich people from demands of poor people, whether it's America's poor or whether it's especially the world's poor. We are a libertarian society that says the poor are burdens on society and they should work or suffer their fate. And that is a British idea that is deeply embedded in American ideology. We don't have a view of charity. We don't have a view of the Gospels. We don't have a view of Matthew 25. We don't have a view of decency. We have a view of libertarianism, which is a Protestant idea that the poor are poor because they are not selected, because they are lazy, because they are deficient, because it's their own fault, maybe because they're colored, whatever it is. This is the American ethos. I want you to understand that in very blunt terms. And so we've got a lot of poor in the United States. And then when it comes to the poor in the world, the American attitude is, are you kidding? So John Kerry, our climate envoy, comes to the COP27, and on climate finance, he proposes some voluntary scheme. That's America. Some voluntary scheme, a voluntary carbon offset scheme, because the U.S. government, even this one that supposedly cares about this, won't ask Congress to actually fund something to enable more finance to go to poorer countries. So the whole fight at COP27 was concentrated on this losses and damages facility. In the end, Europe came along because Europe is a much more decent place in terms of social values. Europe has still has a social democratic, or at least Christian democratic ethos, which is that the poor are not simply burdens on society, but need to be helped in one way or another at various levels of generosity. The US is not on that spectrum right now, I'm telling you, even in the Democratic Party, because the Democrats depend on billionaires to finance them the same way as the Republicans do. And the game is, we pay for your reelection and you vote low taxes for us. That's the game. So at COP27, there was a little bit of a breakthrough made, which is there will be some losses and damages fund. The US was the last to come along. And of course, what happened was, what was agreed was there will be something. We don't know what it will be, but we'll discuss it by next year. This has been going on for a very long time. Kick the ball down the field. And at least they said we're going to do something. Now, at the G20, the issues were basically the same on the economic side. How is sustainable development going to be financed? And absolutely no decisions were taken. So there was, the declaration has quite a bit about the need for financing sustainable development, but there was zero progress on actually any concrete initiatives, period, zero. Anyway, the whole year was devoted to not meeting, devoted to the war in Ukraine, devoted to everything but actually trying to address the financial questions. In my corner of the world, with my work with the UN, my role is to help figure out some solutions for increasing finance for poorer countries so that they can invest in electricity, in clean water and sanitation, in transport, in kids in school, in healthcare, and so on. I can tell you in every major priority area, the actual levels of public spending in the bottom half of the world are so dreadfully short of what would really be needed for solutions that it's shocking. And every day I'm on calls. Yesterday it was on the health sector. Could be education, could be climate finance. Big talk about all the things we need to do, but no funding available. And basically some kind of pretense that, well, poor countries, do your best, raise your taxes, borrow, do something, but nobody looks at any numbers. No one really tries to find any solutions. And again, the United States is not even at the table, because this discussion is just viewed as outside of polite discussion by US authorities who don't want to raise any of these issues with the American people or with the US Congress. And part of the discussion is to get the development banks like the World Bank or the African Development Bank or others to do more, which is the right answer. But for those institutions to be able to do more, they need more capital paid in by the rich countries. So they can do a lot more, and they can leverage money that the rich countries put in, but the rich countries need to put in more. And that's where we're paralyzed right now. So just to simplify, and I mean, I've already grossly simplified, but I think we have two fundamental problems. One is that the great powers are at each other's throats right now, and this is extremely dangerous. And I put the United States as principally responsible for this. I have to say, even recognizing that Putin was the one that invaded Ukraine, I just don't think it would have happened with a different kind of US geopolitics. And the second is we don't have a financial model in which much of the world, I'd say half the world, can break out of poverty. And we don't even have a serious discussion of that, because a serious discussion would require looking at numbers and looking at responsibilities of different parts of the world. And none of our politicians really wants to do this in the high income world, but least of all in the United States. And this is where we're trapped right now. What's the result of this? The result of this is we have a different dynamic in the world than sustainable development. The dynamic we have is great power competition and largely market-driven finance, largely. And the results of both of those is a continuing deepening environmental crisis, continuing widening of inequalities, and continuing geopolitical tensions and open war in Ukraine. So that's my grim take on things. I don't think any of this is inevitable. I think it requires a different mindset. And I actually am a big fan of things like COP27 and the G20. They actually force us to think about real things more than almost anything else that we have. So these last 2 weeks, in that sense, for me, we're not terrible in the sense that I saw lots of effort to overcome the current situation and the current failures of our institutions. But I would say we didn't yet make the breakthrough. So let me stop there and turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you for the really interesting discussion. If I may, I would like to have a question.
Of course.
Yeah, because you were talking about the fact that, let's say, those that are more less lucky than those who live in the West, let's say, or in the north of the world, they will suffer the most. So I read a couple of days ago a piece from The Guardian that was telling us that within the end of the century, Africa will be the home of the 40% of the world population. So my question or my consideration is that at a certain point, for a matter of numbers, something will change. But on the other hand, we hope that it will be not too late.
Yep.
Because we have all these issues to solve. We have geopolitical instability. We have to solve the climate issue. But my hope as a person is that, of course, due to a matter of number, Africa especially will rise up as well. I have a huge faith in the new generation that I think that they will be able to make the change. I don't know if you want to comment on this, or we can just
absolutely
close.
No, absolutely. Right now, Africa's population is 1.4 billion, and the total fertility rate is 5. Africa is the only region still with a high fertility rate. The only other region of any significant population growth is South Asia. But in South Asia, the fertility rate is basically coming down to replacement levels. And what we have mostly is momentum rather than continued high fertility. Africa is the region of very high fertility rates. And Africa's population was around 7% of the world population in 1950. And today it's about 18% of the world population. By 2050, it'll be a quarter of the world population. And as you say, on the current trajectory, Africa actually reaches a population of about 4 billion people by 2100 on the UN forecasts, and roughly 40% of the world population. This is not a good scenario, by the way, for Africa, because what it means is it almost surely would mean absolute massive despair. This is going to be decades of worsening environmental conditions in much of Africa, which is about 70% subhumid or arid, and a lot of drying and environmental stress and thermal stress and rising temperatures will plague Africa. So Africa is going to be very hard hit by the ongoing environmental change. And right now, this rapid population growth actually also very much undermines the escape from poverty. I'll just give you one example. If you look at the proportion of school-aged children in a population, say children age 5 to 20, put it that way, in Africa, it's almost 40% of the population right now. In Italy, my guess would be maybe 10 to 12%. I'd have to look at the numbers exactly. Think about just the financial and organizational and logistical and infrastructural challenge of educating 40% of a population. It's completely out of reach of Africa's budget right now, not even close of any country in Africa. They can't do it, and we're not helping. And that is where the vicious circle comes in, by the way, which is very high fertility rates, kids out of, and that means very young population, most of the kids not completing secondary education, girls being pushed out disproportionately, dropping out, having children starting at a very young age in adolescence, and high fertility rate. So that's a vicious demographic circle rather than a virtuous demographic circle. Okay, this is a long, I'm sorry to be long-winded, but if we were serious about this, the first thing we would be doing is saying we need to ensure that all African children are in school right now. And that by itself would bring down the fertility rates considerably, because you'd have a sharp drop of fertility rates of girls 15 to 19, probably 15 to 24, and the fertility rate would fall from 5 to 3 within 10 years. It would change the demographic perspective dramatically. It would make it feasible for Africa to start escaping from poverty. It would mean the school-age population in the next generation wouldn't be 40%, but maybe 25% of the population. Suddenly you could start affording to educate all of the kids. So my point is, you're right about the changing demographics, but it will not mean empowerment per se. It could mean more chaos, actually. And the right way to empower Africa to, as the young part of our planet, is to make sure right now that every child completes an education, period. And that requires financing to do that, as well as new clever systems. For instance, we should be thinking about how, by giving tablets or iPads or smart devices to kids in Africa, even without the schools, we could have education and training at very low cost. But nobody's really thinking about this in an operational sense, I could say. So a serious approach to the demographic issues and a serious approach to the development issues immediately gets you into the question of strategy, finance, and organization. And all of those discussions take place all the time, but not in a serious way, because what's left out of everything is the finance side. So we're filled with high aspirations, we're filled with goals, we're filled with vision statements, we're filled with all good things, but we're not talking about how actually to pay for any of it, how to actually make the investments, what to really do. And I'm about to get on a call, actually in 1 minute, I think, with the UN leadership on exactly this topic. And I can tell you, I've read innumerable documents in the last few weeks on this financing issue, and they're awful, terrible, because they're aspirational, they're not quantitative, they're just bad. And this is part of our problem. At least as scholars, we ought to lay out the choices far more clearly and press the politicians who don't know this stuff anyway, don't really care that much, but at least to show what would a pathway to success look like. And that is not getting done properly. And I'm about to get on a long call with the UN to complain about all of this in about 30 seconds.
Okay, so thank you. Sorry, I have a little delay on the screen, but I think, okay, yes, finished. So thank you very much. We don't want to just create problems on another really important code. So I thank really much Professor Sachs for taking the time for being with us and for all the interesting points that he have explained to us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank
for
you.
Taking the time.
Yeah, thanks to all friends, and we'll see you soon. I hope in person in Brescia, and great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we are ready to move to the next speakers, which is here in presence with us. So we are just to move on the wide view of our table. And so let me just say a few words about Professor Caruso, which is a professor of economic policy at the Department of Economic Policy, of course, at the Catholic University of Milan, but he is also editor-in-chief of the scientific journal Peace Economics, Peace Science and Public Policy, as well as director at the European Center of Peace Science Integration and Cooperation in Tirana. And he is also columnist at the Italian newspaper The Avvenire. Today, he will give us a brief overview on the concept of the economics of peace, which is the title also of the last book he published on with De Molino. Maybe I will start with a couple of questions, and then I will leave the floor to him. So the first point that came into my mind is which is the rationale behind the concept of the economic of peace, and which are the main facets. I don't know if you want me to list all the points and then you can address each of them, or we can do it one by one.
All the points.
All the points, okay. Then why did you decide to write a book about this? Because I think it was not an easy task with many complex things to put all together. And finally, and then I will move myself, at the beginning of the book, you mentioned that to understand the nature of the economic of peace, we have also to take a look of the antagonist concept, that is the economics of war. Does this mean that we have to be also aware of the whole implication that brings war and also the consequences of such kind of conflicts? So I will leave the stage to Professor Caruso. Thank you.
Thanks, Marta. Thanks. First of all, let me thank for inviting me here. And let me also say happy birthday to the Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, which is a 10-year birthday, right? I'm pretty much, so thanks to University of Brescia. I'm really happy to be here to give some insights about what does it mean peace economics, and even because there is there is an historical linkage between peace economics and environmental economics, because one of the forefathers of environmental economics was also the founder of peace economics. He was named Kenneth Boulding. In the 60s of the last century, he has been also president of the American Economic Association. And in that period, he was one of the first to introduce peace in economic debate, but also environmental issues. So what about peace and economics? The first very point we have to highlight is that exactly descending from the Kenneth Boulding's legacy, and it's something that we are, as economists, we are pretty much aware of that. So that basically we have been educated, in particular my generation of economists, younger economists, PhD students now are much more aware than us when we were students, that economics is not only about exchange. What does it mean? It means that the human reality is so complex that many interaction between humans and between organizations cannot be explained only in the light of price and quantity mechanism. Okay, that means that of course we know that there is a bundle of activities which are not mediated by prices, but that they are intrinsically economics because they imply resources. Okay, and especially about that, Kenneth Boulding wrote a famous line 50 years ago, and the line was, "When economists don't find the price, they feel at sea." They feel at sea in the American jargon means that we really feel something like confused, right? So what's happening now? It's there are no prizes, and the first very moment to understand the economics of peace is that we have to swim into the realm of no market interactions. And in this respect, why I'm saying that younger economists, PhD, are much more aware, because now there is there is a generation of younger economists all around the world that are aware that, for example, that political economy is much more important. Is really important to understand dynamics, societal dynamics, and eventually economic outcomes. So this is the first point. And the second point is exactly that. Anyway, when interaction don't have a price, can be really different, and there could be interaction between agents which are destructive, like and the war is nothing but the largest example, but there are many, or maybe even albeit unproductive, but not destructive. So, for example, if I give Marta a gift, right? I mean, it's not a market interaction; it's a gift, right? But as an economic value, does not create any new added value because it's a gift. It's something already in the market. There was already a market, but as some other kind of value, right? But at the same time, if I steal this new laptop that Marta has bought in a Black Friday, he's on the table. You cannot see that. But if I steal, I mean, it's something I'm doing something economically, in the sense that I'm employing some resources to steal, but it's destructive because I'm deteriorating some capital, some wealth held by Marta, right? And this is exactly the point. The second point is that once we recognize that there are different ways of interaction between rational agents, because we don't depart from rationality, we still love rationality as economists. We are used to use it. We don't depart from rationality. So when rational agents employ resources and not in market interactions, the consequences is that that we can name the activities they are undertaking while looking at the productive outcome they have. So it means that when I steal this laptop, or when I wage a war against another country, I'm doing something which is extremely destructive, which is unproductive, right? But not totally unproductive, which is destructive. But when I'm in the realm in the classical domain of economics and exchange, I'm doing something which is productive because I'm stimulating, the economic activity. When I give a gift to Marta, maybe it's not a big deal in terms of economics because there is new added value, but rather albeit unproductive in monetary terms as no destructive impact on the society. So this means that if we recognize that, then we can give the really point to understand peace and conflict and eventually peace is to come back to the legacy of a famous thought of a famous economist. We all know him as William Baumol. William Baumol, who has been studying for years how firms innovate, for example. And in a famous essay released on the Journal of Political Economy, he explained that the very secret of development, of economic development for society, is nothing but a balance between what is productive and what is unproductive. And if we mix up this lesson with what Pareto said, that exactly about the Pareto at the very beginning said that efforts of man are finalized to create something new or to steal some wealth from the others. So if we mix up what Baumol says, what Pareto said, but also what Jagdish Bhagwati said, that when he recognized that there are some activities which are not producing societal value, but only private profits. If we combine all these ideas, we would say basically that the very secret to understand conflict of peace is not about understanding that there are scarce resources we have to allocate as agents can be devoted to productive or destructive, and when within a society the productive forces are much larger than destructive forces, then that society is going to develop in economic terms. That means that a peaceful scenario can and then peace can support economic development. So what does it mean? It means that in the end, peace is not what most of my colleagues believe. It's not a spillover. Most economists believe that peace is a spillover of economic development. It's rather the opposite. It's peace, which is an asset, is a scenario where productive forces work and are much larger than destructive forces in the very long run, and so peace produces development. In theoretical terms, it's not a trivial distinction. Saying that peace is a spillover or saying that peace is the core argument of an objective function is completely different. So when we speak about economic peace, basically we are recognizing that peace is the core argument of our objective function. And once we have peace, once we build up peace, then we have economic development in the long run. Okay, and so it's rather the third point that I was highlighting is exactly about timing, in the sense that as economists we are all aware that there are huge differences between choices when agents are myopic or when agents are forward-looking, right? And as a social scientist we know this, but as a policymakers don't know this. Basically, even in democracies, what we know is that most policymakers take a decision for the very short time. There is a extremely bad word that captures this idea. That's the word is short-termism, right? Short-termism. Basically, now we are concerned about the 3 months growth rate of GDP. Come on. I mean, okay, 3 months could be a long time, but for a GDP of a big country, 3 months is almost nothing. I'm saying that's zero or negligible, but I'm saying it is almost not. That's completely different. What I should be really interested in is the development path of a society in the medium long run. Consider that, for example, now we are, you're interested in the environmental, right? Environmental issues. And sustainability, one of the core ideas of sustainability is that we have to preserve resources over time, right? So basically what I'm saying is that the peace has exactly the same idea of time that you finance when speak about sustainability of environmental issues. It's exactly the same idea of time, which is different from the short-termism, right? The pronunciation is even terrible, and so basically, if I have to summarize now, so when I deal with peace, basically using some economic ideas, basically the first point is that we do recognize that economics are not all about market interaction. Okay, and the second point is that economic activities are different because they produce different outcomes. In particular, we are interested in understanding that some activities do produce destructive outcomes. Okay, and the third point is time. Time that peace is as the same timing that's as the environmental also economist you have, and that peace is not the spillover of development, but rather is the development is the byproduct of peace. Okay, which is a Copernican turnaround. Okay, and of course, what is destructive? What is destructive? Any activity which is based on actual or potential violence is by definition destructive, in the sense that I do employ resources with a destructive outcome in the light of potential actual threat or potential actual violence, from the micro level to the macro level. An army is nothing but that employment of resources which is unproductive, totally destructive, right? And so the police and so the military spend there. So in real life, you would tell me, yes, but could we live without this stuff, right? Could we live without an army? Could we live without a police? Could we live without a military expenditure? And of course, I would say no, we can't. But if we can accept in a society, within a democracy made of free people, we can accept some a small, not a small, but an adequate police, an adequate measure for army, we wouldn't live in a state like in a totalitarian state with overwhelming police force, overwhelming military army, and so on. So basically, what I'm saying in economic terms is that there is some non-linearity between what's our level of peace and eventual development and the outlays in destructive activities. Okay, so this is not the case that most autocrats in history, most autocrats, dictators in history, in the end, have turned to be a complete economic failure in the long run. Because in the very short run, dictators appear to be pretty much good, you know. Even Adolf Hitler in the Nazi Germany a couple of years, he seemed to recover from the Greek crisis, but in the end, it was even if most people think the opposite, but Nazi Germany, in economic terms, was a complete failure, and so Italy under Mussolini, and of course the Soviet Union, that was a completely economic failure. So basically, all autocrats, even now, you know, the autocrats we know today, Erdogan in Turkey, for example, or Putin in Russia, they are in economic terms, they are a complete failure in the medium and long run. Apparently, in the first couple of years they held their country, it seems that they were performing quite well. Only a couple of years, it doesn't last. Why it doesn't last? Because in the medium long run, autocrats inflate the level of what is unproductive at the expense of productive activities. Okay, why democracies are grow more than autocracies? Because in democracies, productive activities are supported, and in particular, people ask for redistribution for important things like health or education, and the leaders can devote less resources, fewer resources to military and stuff like that. Okay, and why I'm finalizing it, because I go to the third question by Marta. How much time do I have?
Perfect in time.
Perfect in time. So I go to the last point. And the last point, and then I go to the second point. But the last point is what is about economics of war. So the first step we do, when I started my study in my PhD, I was starting thinking about peace and conflict resolution. But eventually, I realized that a step back was necessary. A step back means that first, we need to understand what are really the cost of an economy war, a war economy. Not only when the war is on the battlefield, but even when countries prepare themselves to a system which is informal, which takes shapes in the light of war. And because the costs for war are much larger than we do expect. There is a famous bestseller who started debates. I think you remember that some years ago, Joe Stiglitz and his co-author Linda Balfour from Harvard School of Government, they released this book. It was a bestseller. It was called "The $3 Trillion Dollar Wars." It was about the Iraqi War. The Iraqi War was much more costly than expected, but not only. Not only for the cost of the battlefield, but also for the long run cost related, for example, to veterans. And this is all an example, because now there is a small group of economists all around the world who are studying what are the long term of wars. And I would say two things. That basically, even in peace times, or at least when a war is not open on the battlefield, the worst outcome of a war economy is the deterioration or the loss of human capital. There are two reasons. If there is a war, human capital die. I mean, people die. So, okay, it's simple. When there is no war, the point is that military commitment of a country implies that the youngster believe that military service, military and the education are somehow alternative choices. After the Cold War, the big push of productivity in OECD country, in the European countries in particular, is due to the abolishing of conscription. Even after the World War II, Lawrence Klein was an overgraduate, you know, explained how, you know, the big push, the big boost in Japanese productivity was due to the end of the war, when the young Japanese went back studying, and after 15 years, they increased massively productivity in Japan. And it was the same in Germany. Can Harold recognize this? So basically, what I'm saying that in the long run, since we know that human capital is a very factor of economic development, since military commitment has a negative impact on human capital under many aspects, that's now we don't have to discuss, but under many aspects, this is a very long run cost of a war economy, is that economies don't turn to be productive because, in particular, because of loss of human capital. It was Lawrence Klein that started autocracies in Latin America in the 70s and 80s of the last century, and demonstrated that with a counterfactual experiment that productivity in these countries would have been higher in the absence of violence and in the absence of military expenditure. Most studies, I think something like 75%, and it means all serious, all rigorous studies show that military expenditure and economic growth in both in the medium long run are negatively associated. The rest we hear on the media is based on anecdotes, but we cannot ground a serious policy on anecdotes, right? I'm gonna finish why I wrote this book. Oh, I wrote this book because I wanted to, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is some kind, you know, it's I've been studying this since when I was a PhD student. It was years ago. So it's, and in particular, I wrote this book because at a certain point, it seemed that exactly the idea of economic peace should have been much more popular than it was. After I wrote this book, in very few years, everything happened. Now we are surrounded by war, so now everybody say, "Oh, so this sounds important." Yes, and yes. Consider that, no, besides any jokes, but the point is that we must be aware that as Italians, we are in Italy, but in general, in Western countries, the Cold War was a system where basically there was a system where the decision about the Cold War were taken at the major powers level. So basically, in other countries like Italy, like Germany, like Spain, or whatever, like France, we have to concern about economics, okay, disentangling from politics. So it was something like a kind of bias. In the sense that, okay, we have peace, so we can think about only about politics. But now it's the case that, as also Jeffrey Sachs said, that now is not the period where we can disentangle politics and economics. Now it's time. to some extent, it's a sort of homecoming. Economists go back home in the sense that it never been in history disentangled from politics, and it's time. And it's time we also have to consider this. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like the politicians should start doing their job again. Ends of holiday. No, I'm joking. Maybe I would like to add another point. Will you rewrite differently the book in light of what is happening right now? Would you change something?
No, honestly, no. I would add something, but I wouldn't rewrite what I wrote, because usually, I mean, we are in a university, and it means that what we say is evidence-based. Or so I wouldn't change anything. I would add something, but I wouldn't change anything I wrote, honestly.
So what will you add, if I may ask?
I would add, for example, I mean, when I wrote this book, I made the choice. In this book, you cannot find a word which is really important for economists, for us, which is inequality. Because I wanted to escape from some kind of deterministic idea that was years ago quite popular, that since we have inequality, then we have a conflict. But the idea is that the conflict, I wanted to go beyond trying to, perhaps now I would add something, a paragraph or a chapter about inequality, but it was important at that time. This is the first book about peace and economics, right? In Italy. I think it was important at that time when I wrote the book that to release a larger set of contents about this, because perhaps now I would add inequality, even because after the pandemics we know that inequality is going to worsen everywhere in the world because of many reasons, because of fiscal deficit, but also because education levels are going down in some countries after the lockdown. So another thing that I would add is a proposal I thought about afterwards, after I wrote the book. It's called a proposal of a global buyback weapons. It was an idea that I had during the lockdown, at the time of the lockdown, since you know that now many, especially developing countries or less developed countries, don't have enough money to afford health or to afford any other kind of policies. The idea could be, okay, if we, as rich countries, we do create a fund under the United Nations system that the payback weapons of these less developed countries, they could find fresh money to realize policies. At the same time, we could demilitarize some areas. A payback is nothing new. Is not has been done till now in history several times for guns or for rifles since the Katanagahari Japan centuries ago. Buyback is something done for which has been done for private citizens. But why not doing this for countries, especially for highly in-depth countries? You know, there is an historical debate how to relieve debts of very poor countries. Okay, well, why not asking them to provide us with their weapons in order to demilitarize? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but why not try? This is something that would add. Yes, which is an economic policy basically. And the second thing I would add, that was only in its very it was just the idea. I spoke about education and human capital, and I spoke about military commitment, right? So basically, education is an investment in the future, right? So we do invest in education, and we have human capital tomorrow that will be increased productivity. So it's a good thing for us. And then we have military spending, which is a burden for the economy, which is the current actual burden for the economy. So the idea is that why don't we provide policymaker with a novel target policy, which could be nothing but the ratio between the future and the future productivity and the present waste of resources. If you now what I'm doing now, one of some papers I'm working on, that's we are studying why don't we use the ratio between the public investment in education on public military expenditure, and we are verifying that in the long run, in the medium run, this ratio, this novel variable is associated with development levels, right? So basically, there could be, okay, don't consider to the policymaker, don't consider on one table military commitment, don't consider on the other table other factors for driving economic development, but combine them in order to overcome the losses and the cost we have to undertake for our military commitment. Okay, this is something I would add, yeah. But of course, I think any author would add something once a book has been written. So, but anyway, it's okay. It's okay with me at the moment. I mean, it's still okay with me, even if okay.
So I want to thank Professor Caruso for also giving us some policy advice for the future, and maybe you can just write a second book.
Yeah, I have to. Yes, I have.
Okay, so now it's time for our last speaker. That is Alberto Pallecchi. So let me check if he can now share the screen. Okay, Alberto, if you want to try.
Yes, let me try. Window.
Okay.
PowerPoint. There you go. I found it. Can you see the screen?
No, 1 second. Okay, yes, sorry, we had to adjust also for the people in presence.
Yeah. Yes, it's just one slide, but I think it helps for those that are following online.
I realized that I don't know if we can do it in presence of sharing the QR code, because I would be required to ask the people all to move here near the table, but okay. So
maybe for those that are on YouTube.
Those that are online. So let me first introduce you. Now we have Dr. Alberto Pallecchi, which is program manager at the World Resource Institute in Europe, in Amsterdam. He will present us the work carried out within the Water, Peace and Security Partnership. And thanks to the work of different institutions across the world, the project developed an early warning system to help predict potential water conflicts. A part, of course, of the many scientific publications related to this project, the tool was presented in the worldwide press across, we have The Guardian, Euronews, and so on. But I think that the most important thing is that all the material concerning the tool and the project is available online for everyone. So I will leave the floor to Alberto to tell us more about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta, and also thanks to all the organizing committee, from Professor Vergalli to all the organizations supporting this event, and obviously Professor Caruso for his brilliant intervention. And I'm very happy to be here today to tell you more about the work that WRI, the World Resources Institute, is doing as part of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership to turn water crisis into opportunities for peace building. So why water? Water, as you probably know, is at the heart of ecosystems on which human livelihoods depends for agriculture, livestock, and fisheries. As such, water is key to stability and development. However, as we heard from the always frank and straightforward voice of Professor Sachs, climate change, population growth, rapid urbanization, growing economic demand for materials, and sometimes even weak governance or mismanagement are posing numerous challenges to this very precious resource. So the reality is that water insecurity is increasing worldwide. Currently, more than 1/3 of the world population lives in water-scarce regions, and these numbers are expected to rise to unprecedented levels. At the same time, disasters like flood or droughts are affecting around 50 million people and causing billions of damage each year. In most cases, these threats are merely a consequence of changes in weather, but also manifest issues around inadequate water management and governance. So these multiple interacting factors combined with other issues that undermine the resilience of communities makes them very often more vulnerable to social and economic disruption, posing a real threat to livelihood, food production, and energy security at the local and national levels. So this uncertainty has consequences for the security of communities, for countries, and for entire regions, all the way up to the global level. So the Water, Peace and Security is a partnership that we established in 2018 with the support from the government of the Netherlands to raise greater awareness and to mobilize action on the relationship between water and human security. It is currently composed of 6 partners, of which the World Resources Institute is one, organizations of very different nature, water, security, or peace-building organizations. We work to develop innovative tools and services that help hopefully international and local stakeholders working in high-risk areas to identify, understand, and address water-related security risks. Now, for water-focused interventions to be most effective, it is very important to, first of all, identify and prioritize opportunities to intervene before the outbreak or the escalation of conflict, as well as understanding local conditions and engage with local actors. We believe that if key actors have early and enhanced awareness on the urgent security risks related to water that also threatens their own interest, and if they have the capacity required to intervene, then they will work to prevent the escalation of conflict and jointly undertake the inclusive and informed action that is required. We hope that this will also result in reduced water-related security risks and in improved conflict-sensitive water management, and finally also enhance peace and collaboration in general. So the ultimate goal of the Water, Peace and Security Partnership is really to turn water from a source of conflict into a tool for peace. Now, for a very long time, the relationship between water security and conflict has been, let's say, largely invisible in the international dialogue around peace, security, and development. Policies and strategy to counter risk and resolution of actual conflict tends to look more at the political dimension of conflict or the economic dimension of conflict without taking, let's say, water or other resources as root causes of conflict into proper account. This typically leads to solutions that address the symptoms of the conflict, but do not resolve some of the underlying drivers. So the Water, Peace and Security then really works exactly to avoid this type of situation. How we do that? So first of all, at the global level, we aim at providing relevant information to decision makers. To do so, the World Resources Institute and partners of the Water Peace and Security Partnership have developed a global early warning model, as Marta already mentioned, to predict conflict, along with an accompanying tool that can be accessed and explored for free, as you see on the screen, at waterpeaceandsecurity.org under Global Tool on our website. So this tool allows to analyze conflict hotspots around the world, generating a forecast of the likelihood of existing and emerging conflict in some areas of the world, Africa, the Middle East, and portion of Asia. It does so by identifying places where 10 or more fatalities per month are forecasted based on the parameters of the so-called ACLED dataset, which stands for Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, plus other input variables that are both biophysical and socioeconomic that we take from publicly available datasets. So the ACLED datasets that I mentioned collects the information about political violence and protest events from multiple sources, from the internet to newspapers and so on. These entries form the basis for our outcome variable, that is the presence of or absence of conflict in a given area during a given period of time. So our model is basically picking up a variety of local events like herders and pastoralist group fighting over resources, keeping in mind that our goal is to foster timely, effective, and informed water-related interventions to mitigate conflict and build peace. This tool only really represents the initial step of a broader process. What it does is to help to pinpoint hotspots, compare different regions, and explore the underlying data. But after a hotspot for conflict, for water-related tensions has been identified, then a regional analysis is required to actually examine the links between water and human responses and try to identify causal relationships that are more localized and time-bound that can in turn support intervention of mobilization, capacity development, and dialogue. Why this? Because the relationship between water and conflict is complex, is context-specific, and very often is highly debated. So there are various dynamic factors contributing to conflict, often with different impacts from a specific situation to another. For example, water-related tensions can happen when there is water scarcity, but can also happen when there is enough or abundant water. So there are different numerous pathways linking water problems to security threats, from drought leading to famine in failed states, to chronically stressed irrigated areas undermining rural livelihoods, to dams, upstream dams, or water diversion affecting the security of downstream users. Now, because of this very complex and, let's say, dynamic nature, it is very difficult to generalize and predict conflict through the weighting of factors alone, only through the data. So the global early warning tool that we built really tries to overcome the complexity of the water and security nexus to identify water-related conflict by using a so-called supervised machine learning model. It's a machine learning that analyzes a range of socioeconomic and environmental variables, including, of course, water indicator, which is our entry point to detect conflict, to identify patterns of correlation with conflict. Based on this model, the tool then generates predictions of existing and emerging conflict. I won't get too much into the technical details here, but just to give you an idea, we started with over 80 different variables and used a system that is called recursive future elimination to get down to a smaller number of predicting variables, because we basically realized that the model was performing with the same efficiency having 20 or 80 variables. Now, in case you're asking yourself how well the model performs and whether we are actually able to predict conflict, as we say, 12 months in advance, the reply is that yes, we are able to correctly predict roughly 86% of all conflict that occur. However, in ensuring that we are not missing conflicts, we are very often over-predicting conflict. That means that emerging conflict usually occur in our prediction in places where our model predicts between 50 and 70% chance of conflict. So we have an over prediction on the emerging conflicts, but we're fairly good at predicting the whole spectrum of emerging and ongoing conflict. Now, it is very important here to specify that a main assumption that correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. We've probably heard this mantra many times. This machine learning model does not define which particular variable caused the conflict, but can predict, in fact, the existence of conflict based on correlation patterns. It is a bit like using a thermometer when you feel sick. It tells you whether you have a temperature, but cannot really say what actually is causing it. So this is, in short, the WPS, the Water Peace and Security process. We start by building understanding using the global tool to identify hotspots of conflict. And then we perform regional analysis to examine the link between water and human responses. We then engage with local communities on the ground using our regional data to mobilize action, develop local capacity, and facilitate dialogue. I would like to end with a little comment around the distinction between water war, water conflict, because there has been a lot of hype around the word water war, since probably a few articles and commentaries have raised the idea that the wars of the future will be fought around water. Now, it is very important to differentiate here between war in the sense of interstate conflict and conflict, which actually also include violent conflict at the subnational level between communities. There has so far never been a war between states over water in modern times, while there has been serious conflict between states over the use or the development of water resources, such as between Ethiopia and Egypt for the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam on the Nile, or between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan over the Rogun Dam. Such conflicts have not involved, at least so far, and hopefully also for the future, any violence, and certainly remain below the threshold of formal war. Conflict nonetheless exists between states, but this typically takes the form of a deterioration of diplomatic relation, of verbal threats, cutting of ties, diplomatic and trade ties, which can, of course, also have negative repercussions on state and the people. The kind of conflict that we focus a bit more are those at the subnational level, so between individual people, between communities, provinces. There, we have actually seen way more conflict, including violent conflict in the past, as different people, ethnic communities, or even economic sectors sometimes compete for water resources. Climate change, of course, and other pressures are likely to intensify these conflicts. But let me try to end with a positive note, because overall, cooperation at any level, from the very local to the international, by far has prevailed over conflict around the world. So water, in our view, and that's what we hope, can be really a tool for peace, and maybe even more in the future, thanks to the work and the increasing attention over these resources. Thank you so much for following.
Thank you, Alberto. You just say a few words that I was planning to make you a question, that the fact that water is also a huge source of cooperation, especially across communities. I don't know, Professor Caruso has a question for you.
Sure.
Okay.
First of all, let me congratulations for your talk. For the project, of course. Yes, it's very challenging, this story about water, because sometimes in some kind of the question is like, you know, the question of what comes first, the conflict or the political conflict or the conflict on water. For example, a couple of years ago, I took part to a meeting between Israeli and Palestinians on a thin river called for the Deira Basin. Yeah. And so you really, there the question is, okay, and the meeting was about how to create an agency to manage the Deira Basin. And apparently, I mean, everything was fantastic because we were in Milan speaking about that. But the awareness was that when they would have go back, then the political turmoil would have been overwhelming. So it's very challenging project because really about water is what comes first. But this is a common. The point is, the question is, to what extent your project is, your machine learning story is also considering two factors: the sector, I mean, the structure of the economies, because of course rural areas differ from urban areas. I mean, this is so to what extent you are able with your data to consider this, and to what extent your project in your machine learning you also considering different kind of institutions. As economists, you know, we do take advantage of the lesson by Elinor Ostrom. She was so good in explaining what on a local, in the very local stories, institution, either formal or informal institution matter a lot. And about water, I'm pretty sure that's local institution matter much more, to some extent could matter much more. So my question is whether you have enough data and you are continuing your machine learning story. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, so let me start by saying that our key audience can be summarized with the 4D community. So it's basically diplomacy, development, defense, and disaster risk reduction. That doesn't necessarily means that we don't work with economic actors, because we realize how much influence businesses, especially at the local level, have in the use of resources, and sometimes the use that they do, especially for the big companies in the global south, can actually have serious impacts on the livelihood of communities. That said, I do believe that especially the economic sector and the business sector should step up a little bit more their engagement for what regards the political dialogue around water and security. Sometimes I've been attending meetings where those big corporations present their water strategy, and when confronted with the question, do you actually consider your role in supporting water resilience on the ground, or the resilience of community from which you take the water for your business, the response is normally, this is not really my business. You know, I put one drop inside my cycle and I put back the exact same drop, which is not necessarily the case. Actually, it's a very let's say generous consideration. But apart from that, I do believe that the role of economic actors in the global south specifically, but also around the world, around peace and security, should be getting more attention, and they should be also made aware that if not they are part of the problem, they should definitely be part of the solution because of the role that they play on the ground, also because of the visibility, and also because those consumers that consume from them are those same communities that will likely be the most affected by water insecurity.
Io o lui?
C'è un delay qua. È finita.
Yes, I think I'm done.
Okay, so since we are perfect in time, I want to thank all the speakers, and I will just leave the floor to Professor Kunduri to close the session. So if she should be able to talk. Okay. Alberto? I think, Phoebe, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Well, it was an exciting webinar, very to the needed discussion of our times, peace, resources, and the environment, with a great reason to celebrate the 10 years of one of the most active and focused on excellence associations, national associations that is closely linked to our European Association of Environmental Resource Economy. So I'm very happy to be here and close this event. And let me briefly try to summarize the three amazing speakers and thank Marta for her excellent moderation and also for putting together this event under the leadership of Sergio, our dear, active, and very contributing Professor Vergalli. Now, Jeff, Professor Sachs opened the discussion. Coming back from COP, actually, we spent together a week at the COP, and then he moved on to Bali for G20 meetings, and he made 2 points. The first point, that we need new approaches to geopolitics that basically support vivid collaboration and vivid ability to discuss the geopolitical issues and conflicts, and through this collaboration and discussion, identify solutions away from actual war. And then he also said that sustainable development, yes, is our way forward, our blueprint for the future, but the crucial issue that has been missing from all discussions is how you finance it. So he made a point that it was good that now COP27 and G20 meetings discuss funding, have agreed, at least in the call, for the loss and damage fund, but this has to be further elaborated and identify ways to finance the global south in order to engage them in the transition. So it's all about societal dynamics and societal economic outcomes under collaboration and serious thinking about the funding of the different initiatives that we need to support the transition to sustainability. Then we had an amazing speech from a big thought leader of our time, Professor Caruso, who referred to his new book on economics of peace. I'm taking a few takeaways from what he said that made a very vivid impression and are, of course, evidence-based. First, that autocracies are unproductive, highly unproductive, especially if you assess them over the medium and long run. The cost of war is usually almost always larger than expected. Because mainly due to the loss of not just infrastructure, but loss and degeneration of human capital. And finally, that the economy is much bigger than what we see in the market economy. Things that matter, welfare, peace, public goods are reflected in markets, And most importantly, the future is nowhere reflected in markets. So if you are interested in sustainability, you need to engage the political economy, the politicians and the policymakers into a discussion of longer run management plans, of management plans that take into account the medium and the long run in order to protect and safeguard not only what you are going to live through as a human person, which is the short and the medium run, but also what you are going to inherit to the future generations, which has to be enough in order to sustain their welfare and keep them away from conflict. Finally, a very interesting presentation from Dr. Pallecchi, who presented an early warning system to help predict potential water conflicts. I worked in water economics for a long time. Conflict and strategic behavior is one crucial issue that defines the evolution of civilizations even, and I find this tool very useful because it allows identifying hotspots of conflict and then analysis of the regional socioeconomic and geopolitical situation that can identify the sources of the problem and then provide solutions in order to reduce the probability of a conflict focus around water in that particular region. I fully agree with his closing statement that water conflicts are very central to many national and international developments, and that economics have a big role in these conflicts, and we should not be left out of the economic analysis and of the business plans of the companies that are involved in water provision and distribution. Thank you very much for everything. I will be closing by saying, in this multi-crisis framework, the COVID, the economic crisis and accompanying inflationary pressures, the climate crisis, the biodiversity collapse crisis, the war, the geopolitical crisis, which aggravates the energy crisis and the food crisis, together with the population crisis and the increase in inequality crisis, is a very difficult scenery. And the hope comes from, I think, UN Agenda 2030, a very holistic framework, systemic, integrated and interdisciplinary framework that can help us identify our pathways out of this crisis. And I am hopeful with regards to this framework, not only because it is holistic, not only because it is systemic and integrated, not only because it takes into account economic, social, and environmental issues, but also because it's very well defined. 17 goals, 169 targets, 300 KPIs measuring the performance to each target. We can measure our performance and
È saltata? Yeah, I think that, okay, I think we have lost the connection.
I am
Okay,
back just
here
to
you are.
I am hopeful because this framework of the 17 SDGs, the 169 targets, the 300 KPIs that are actually measurable is a framework that allow us to monitor and assess our performance and gives direct guidelines of how we can transform in a systemic, holistic and sustainable way. Let's give it a serious try. Let's seriously integrate it in our policy making, and let's empower our citizens, our businesses, our financial institutions, our university and technology developments to really engage in this transformation using this blueprint as their guidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phoebe. I think that I will not be able to add anything else. I want to thank you also for the wrap up. And let me close with this, that let's see us next time with the real moderator or chair of this event, maybe the next year. That is Sergio, of course. And I want to thank all of you for being here with us, with the speaker, the audience, and the people that has organized this event. So I think we can close. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.